If the world is going to end, it ends on my terms.
The wrench slipped from my grease-stained fingers at exactly 11:47 p.m. when I heard my wife's voice drift through the garage window like poison through clean water. You don't get to have an opinion about what I do because you're not my dad or my owner. I froze under the hood of my battered Honda, every muscle in my 49-year-old body going rigid. 23 years of marriage. And Marta had never spoken to me like that. Hell, she'd never spoken to anyone like that. The tone was ice cold, dismissive, cruel. Guess that makes me the family dog, I thought bitterly. I should have peed on her shoes years ago. I crept closer to the window, my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged animal. Through the thin glass, I could see Marta pacing our kitchen in her silk pajamas, phone pressed to her ear, her perfectly manicured fingers gesturing wildly at no one. "Jake, listen to me," she continued, and my blood turned to slush. "He's completely clueless. David spends more time with that stupid car than he does paying attention to anything real." Jake. Who the hell was Jake? I'd been David Brennan for 49 years. Accountant turned small business owner, former amateur boxer, father of 2 kids who barely tolerated me, husband to a woman who apparently discussed me with strangers named Jake at midnight. The garage suddenly felt like a tomb, all stale air and the smell of motor oil and betrayal. "The Vegas trip is perfect," Marta was saying. 3 days, no questions asked. He actually believes it's a girls' weekend with Victoria. My anniversary. She was talking about our anniversary weekend. I'd made reservations at Chez Laurent, the French place she'd been dropping hints about for months. Expensive as hell, but I'd wanted to surprise her, wanted to fix whatever had been going wrong between us. The phone call ended, and I heard her footsteps clicking across the kitchen tiles. I scrambled back to the Honda, grabbed the wrench, and pretended to be absorbed in checking the oil filter. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the damn thing twice. The garage door opened with its familiar squeal. "David, what are you doing out here so late?" I looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time in what felt like weeks. Marta stood in the doorway, backlit by the kitchen light, looking like the successful advertising executive she was. 47 years old, still beautiful, still capable of making my chest tighten when she smiled. But she wasn't smiling now. "Alternator's been making noise," I lied smoothly. "Figured I'd take a look before it dies completely." She nodded, already losing interest. "Don't stay up too much longer. I have an early flight tomorrow." "Right. Vegas." Something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe, or irritation that I'd remembered. "Victoria's been planning this for months. You know how she gets." Victoria Chen, Marta's best friend since college. Queen bee of their social circle, married to a surgeon, lived in a house that could have doubled as a museum. I'd never liked her, and the feeling was mutual. She had a way of looking at me like I was something stuck to her shoe. "Have fun," I said, turning back to the engine. "Try not to lose too much money at the tables." Marta's laugh sounded forced. "You know me better than that." "Do I?" I wanted to ask. Because the woman I married 23 years ago wouldn't have been whispering sweet nothings to some guy named Jake while her husband worked on cars in the garage. She left without saying goodnight. I waited until I heard her bedroom door close. Our bedroom door, though I'd been sleeping in the guest room for the past 3 months. Then I pulled out my phone and opened the Find My Friends app. Marta's location showed up as a blue dot in our house, but I took a screenshot anyway. Call it insurance. The next evening, Marta left for Vegas with 2 suitcases and a kiss on my cheek that felt like a business transaction. I watched her Uber pull away from our suburban Cleveland driveway, then went inside and poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon. Our house felt different without her in it, not peaceful empty. The living room with its carefully arranged furniture and family photos seemed like a museum exhibit. Middle-class American marriage, circa 2024. Everything looked normal, but nothing felt right. I was on my second bourbon when I decided to check her location again. The blue dot wasn't in Vegas. It wasn't even at the airport. It was across town, in the upscale Tremont district, at an address I didn't recognize. My hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped, replaced by something colder and more focused. I grabbed my keys and drove through the November darkness, following my phone's GPS like a bloodhound following a scent. The address led me to a sleek glass condominium complex, the kind of place where parking spaces cost more than most people's cars. I pulled into a visitor spot and stared up at the building, my breath fogging the windshield. 4th floor, Unit 4B. That's where the blue dot was pulsing. I sat in my car for 20 minutes watching the windows. At 9:15, I saw movement behind the curtains of 4B. Two silhouettes close together, moving in ways that made my stomach clench. That's when I saw Marta's face in the window. She was laughing, her head thrown back, her hair loose around her shoulders. A man's hands were on her waist. Tall, dark-haired, wearing an expensive-looking shirt. He spun her around and she kissed him like she hadn't kissed me in years. I sat there for another 10 minutes, watching my marriage die in real time. Then I got out of the car and walked to the building's parking garage. It didn't take long to find his car, a silver BMW with vanity plates that read Jake 1. Creative director probably, or marketing executive. The kind of guy who wore designer jeans and called everyone buddy while stabbing them in the back. I looked around the garage. Security cameras in the corners, but the lighting was dim. I pulled out my keys and walked slowly along the driver's side of the BMW, letting the metal scrape against the paint in one long, satisfying line. Then I took out a business card, one of my old accounting firm cards, and wrote on the back, "Welcome to the neighborhood, homewrecker. Hope she's worth it. The husband." I tucked the card under his windshield wiper and walked back to my car, adrenaline singing in my veins. I was halfway home when I realized I'd made a mistake. The security camera in the corner had been pointed right at Jake's parking space. My face would be clear as day on the footage. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We saw what you did. Stay away from what doesn't belong to you." I pulled over and stared at the message, my heart pounding again. They'd gotten my license plate, probably looked up my registration. Jake and his friends, maybe Jake and my wife, were already closing ranks. I typed back, "She belonged to me first." The response came immediately, "Not anymore." I drove home through the empty streets, my mind racing. 23 years of marriage, 2 kids, a mortgage, a business I'd built from nothing. And it was all crumbling because my wife had decided to trade up for a guy with a BMW and a downtown condo. But as I pulled into my driveway and saw our house, dark, quiet, waiting, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, sharp and raw, but underneath it was something else, something harder. They wanted to play games? Fine. I'd spent my whole life being the nice guy, the responsible one, the man who fixed things and paid bills and kept his mouth shut when people walked all over him. Maybe it was time to see what happened when the nice guy decided to stop being nice. Marta came home from Vegas on Sunday night with a tan that looked suspiciously like it came from a tanning bed and stories that didn't quite add up. She'd supposedly lost $200 at blackjack, but her credit card statement, which I'd started checking religiously, showed charges at restaurants and shops I knew she'd never go to with Victoria. "How was your weekend?" she asked, dropping her suitcases in the hallway like she expected me to carry them upstairs. "Quiet," I said. "Relaxing. Got a lot done around the house." She nodded absently, already scrolling through her phone. "Good. That's good." I waited for her to ask what I'd done, to show even the slightest interest in how I'd spent our anniversary weekend alone. She didn't. Monday morning, I drove to my office, a small accounting firm I'd bought from my former boss 5 years ago and tried to focus on tax returns and quarterly reports. But my mind kept drifting to that silver BMW and the way Marta had laughed in Jake's arms. Around noon, my daughter Amelia called. "Dad, are you okay? Mom said you've been acting weird lately." Amelia was 20, a junior at Ohio State, studying psychology. She had Marta's sharp intelligence and my stubborn streak, which made for some interesting family dinners. She was also the only person in our family who still seemed to give a damn about my existence. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just work stress." "Are you and Mom having problems?" The question hit me like a punch to the solar plexus. "What makes you ask that?" "She's been different. Happy, but not in a good way, like secretive happy. And Ross said she's been getting a lot of phone calls lately." Ross, my 22-year-old son, worked at a tech startup and lived in his childhood bedroom because rent in Cleveland was insane. He barely looked up from his computer most days, so if he'd noticed Marta's phone habits, they must have been pretty obvious. "Your mom's under a lot of pressure at work," I said carefully. "The agency's been going through some changes." "Dad?" Amelia's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm not 12 anymore. If something's going on, you can tell me." I stared out my office window at the gray November sky. "I don't know what's going on, honey. That's the problem." That evening, I decided to do some investigating. While Marta was in the shower, I went through her purse and found a receipt from Chez Laurent, the restaurant where I'd made our anniversary reservation. She'd been there Friday night, the night she was supposed to be flying to Vegas. She'd taken Jake to our anniversary dinner. I was still holding the receipt when she walked into the kitchen, hair wrapped in a towel, wearing the silk robe I'd bought her for Christmas 2 years ago. "What's that?" she asked, and I heard the sharp edge in her voice. "Receipt fell out of your purse." I held it up. "Chez Laurent? I thought you were in Vegas Friday night." For just a moment, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. Then her expression hardened. "We stopped there on the way to the airport. Victoria wanted to try their cocktails. At 9:30 at night, for a 10:15 flight? The flight was delayed." She snatched the receipt from my hand. "Why are you going through my things, David?" "I wasn't going through anything. It fell out when you dropped your purse." "Right." She turned away, but not before I saw something ugly flicker across her face. "I'm going to bed. Try not to wake me up when you come stumbling in from the garage." I didn't go to the garage that night. Instead, I sat in the kitchen with my laptop and did what any suspicious husband in 2024 would do. I Googled Jake Tremont Cleveland. The search results made my stomach drop. Jake Morrison, creative director at Pinnacle Marketing, 38 years old, divorced, no kids. His LinkedIn profile showed him at industry events, always with a different woman on his arm, always smiling that practice smile that said he knew exactly how good-looking he was. Pinnacle Marketing. I knew that name. They'd pitched Marta's agency for a partnership deal 6 months ago. She'd been working late a lot around then, coming home energized and distracted in ways I hadn't seen in years. I scrolled through his social media profiles. Instagram showed a lifestyle of expensive restaurants, weekend trips to Chicago and Detroit, craft cocktails and artisanal everything. The kind of life Marta had been hinting she wanted more of lately. His most recent post was a photo of 2 wine glasses on a white tablecloth, captioned, "Perfect evening with an amazing woman." Posted Friday night at 9:47 p.m. Our anniversary. He'd posted about my wife on our anniversary. I closed the laptop and poured another bourbon. Then I opened it again and started typing. If Jake Morrison wanted to play games on social media, I could play too. I created a fake Instagram account at Cleveland Truth and started following both Jake and Marta. Then I began documenting everything. Screenshots of their posts, photos of Jake's BMW in various locations around the city, timestamps and locations that didn't match Marta's stories about where she'd been. By Tuesday, I had enough evidence to confront her. By Wednesday, I realized I didn't want to confront her. I wanted to destroy her. The breaking point came Thursday evening. I was at Murphy's Tavern, a dive bar near my office, having a beer with Sam Rodriguez, my old boxing coach. Sam was 65, built like a fire hydrant, and had been trying to get me back into the gym for years. "You look like crap, Brennan," he said, studying my face over his Guinness. "What's eating you?" I was about to deflect with some joke about work stress when I saw them. Marta and Jake sitting in a corner booth, her hand on his arm, both of them laughing at something on his phone. She was wearing the black dress I'd bought her for her birthday, the one she said was too fancy for Cleveland. They were 30 feet away from me, and she hadn't even glanced in my direction. "Son of a witch," Sam muttered, following my gaze. "That your wife?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "You want to leave?" "No." The word came out harder than I'd intended. "I want to see how this plays out." We didn't have to wait long. Jake got up to use the bathroom, and Marta immediately pulled out her phone. I watched her type a message, and my own phone buzzed. Text from Marta. "Working late tonight. Don't wait up." She was lying to me while sitting 30 feet away. That's when Victoria Chen walked in. I hadn't seen Victoria in months, but she looked exactly the same. Perfectly styled blonde hair, designer clothes that probably cost more than my car payment, that superior smile that made me want to punch something. She slid into the booth next to Marta like she belonged there. "Well, well," Sam said quietly. "Looks like the gang's all here." Victoria was talking animatedly, gesturing toward the bar's front window. Marta was nodding, looking nervous. When Jake came back from the bathroom, Victoria stood up and shook his hand like they were conducting business, which I realized they probably were. Victoria had introduced them. Victoria, who'd been Marta's best friend for 20 years, who'd been to our house for every birthday party and holiday dinner, who'd smiled at me and made small talk while she was setting up my wife's affair. I stood up, my bar stool scraping against the floor. "David," Sam said, grabbing my arm. Think about this. I am thinking about it. I shook him off. I'm thinking about it real clearly. I walked across the bar, my footsteps steady and sure. The conversation at their table stopped when they saw me coming. Victoria's face went pale. Marta's went red. Jake just looked confused. "Evening, ladies," I said, stopping at their table. "Jake." "David." Marta's voice was barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "Having a drink with an old friend. You remember Sam Rodriguez, don't you? My boxing coach?" I gestured toward our table, where Sam was watching with obvious interest. "Funny thing about Sam, he taught me that the best way to handle a problem is to face it head on." Jake cleared his throat. "I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Jake Morrison." He held out his hand. I looked at it for a long moment, then smiled. David Brennan. The husband. Jake's hand dropped. Victoria stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "We should go," she said quickly. "Marta, we should really go." "Actually," I said, sitting down in Victoria's vacated chair, "I think we should all stay and get to know each other better. After all, we're practically family now." The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Other patrons were starting to stare, sensing drama in the air. Marta found her voice first. "David, please, not here." "Why not here? This seems like the perfect place. Public, casual, no pressure." I looked around the table. "So, Jake, tell me about yourself. What do you do for a living? Besides sleeping with other men's wives, I mean?" Jake's face flushed red. "Look, man, I think there's been some misunderstanding." "Has there? Because I'm pretty sure I understand perfectly." I pulled out my phone and showed him the screenshot of his Instagram post from Friday night. "Perfect evening with an amazing woman. That was my anniversary, Jake, 23 years. Marta made a small, wounded sound. Victoria grabbed her purse and headed for the door without another word. But Jake surprised me. Instead of following Victoria's lead, he leaned forward, his jaw set. "Your anniversary," he said quietly. "When was the last time you took her somewhere nice? When was the last time you made her feel special?" The question hit me like a slap. "Excuse me?" "She told me about your marriage, David. About how you ignore her, how you spend more time with your car than with her, how you haven't touched her in months." "Jake," Marta said urgently. "Don't." But he was on a roll now, his voice getting louder. "She deserves better than some washed-up accountant who thinks marriage is just about showing up. She deserves someone who appreciates what he has." The bar had gone quiet around us. Even the bartender was watching now. I stood up slowly, my hands flat on the table. "You're right about one thing, Jake. She does deserve better. But here's what she's not going to get from you: respect. Because a man who builds his happiness on destroying someone else's marriage isn't capable of respect. He's just capable of taking what doesn't belong to him." I looked down at Marta, who was staring at her hands. "When you're ready to have an adult conversation about our marriage, you know where to find me. But next time, leave the boy toy at home." I turned and walked back to Sam, my legs surprisingly steady. Behind me, I heard Jake's chair scrape and Marta's urgent whisper, "Just leave it alone." Sam was grinning when I sat down. "Not bad, kid. Your footwork's still decent." "This isn't over," I said, watching Jake and Marta hurry toward the exit. "No," Sam agreed. "I don't think it is. Question is, what are you going to do about it?" I finished my beer in one long swallow. "I'm going to win." The next morning, I woke up with the kind of clarity that comes after you've finally stopped lying to yourself. Marta was already gone, early meeting according to the note on the kitchen counter, and the house felt different. Not empty this time, expectant. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, and got to work. First, I transferred half of our joint savings account into my personal checking account. Perfectly legal. My name was on both accounts, and I'd contributed more than half the money anyway. Then, I moved our emergency fund, which was technically in my name alone since I'd inherited it from my father. By 9 a.m., I'd legally relocated $43,000 out of Marta's reach. Next, I called my lawyer, Tom Kowalski, who'd handled our house purchase and my business incorporation. Tom was a good guy, straightforward, no bullcrap. "David, what can I do for you?" "I need to know my options, Tom. Hypothetically speaking, if my marriage was over, what would that look like financially?" There was a pause. "Are we talking divorce?" "We're talking preparation." Tom sighed. "Come in this afternoon. Bring your financial records, tax returns, everything. And David, don't do anything stupid while you're angry." "I'm not angry, Tom. I'm strategic." That afternoon, I learned that Ohio was a no-fault divorce state, which meant Marta's affair wouldn't affect the settlement. But it also meant that my recent financial moves were completely legal, and if I played things right, I could protect most of my business assets. The house will have to be split, Tom explained. But since you've been making the mortgage payments from your business account, we can argue for a larger share. Your retirement accounts are mostly separate. The big question is spousal support. She makes more than I do. Then you might be entitled to alimony. Tom's smile was sharp. Funny how that works. I left Tom's office with a folder full of documents and a plan that was starting to take shape. But legal maneuvering was only part of what I had in mind. That evening, I drove to Planet Fitness and reactivated my membership. Then I went to Sam's gym, a cramped, sweaty place that smelled like leather and determination. "Look what the cat dragged in," Sam said when he saw me. "You here to work out your feelings on the heavy bag?" "I'm here to get back in shape." I started wrapping my hands. "How long to get me back to fighting weight?" "Depends. You planning to fight in the ring or out of it?" "Both." Sam studied my face for a long moment. "All right, but we do this right. No shortcuts, no ego, no stupid mistakes. You want to be dangerous, you got to be smart first." I spent 2 hours in that gym, rediscovering muscles I'd forgotten I had. By the time I left, my hands were raw and my shoulders ached, but I felt more like myself than I had in months. Marta was waiting when I got home, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and an expression I couldn't read. "We need to talk," she said. I poured myself a bourbon and sat down across from her. "I'm listening. What happened at Murphy's last night was unacceptable." "Which part? The part where I found you on a date with your boyfriend? Or the part where I didn't pretend not to notice?" She flinched. "Jake isn't my boyfriend." "What is he then?" It's complicated, David." I laughed, and the sound was uglier than I'd intended. "It's really not complicated, Marta. You're cheating on me. That's about as simple as it gets. You don't understand. Then explain it to me." I leaned forward. "Explain how you ended up at our anniversary restaurant with another man. Explain the Vegas trip that never happened. Explain why you're lying to my face while you're screwing someone else." Tears started rolling down her cheeks, but I felt nothing. The part of me that would have comforted her, that would have pulled her into my arms and told her everything would be okay, had died in that parking garage. "I never meant for this to happen," she whispered. "But it did happen. And you kept making it happen. So what do you want to do about it?" "I want to try to fix this. Jake doesn't mean anything." "Stop." I held up my hand. "Don't insult my intelligence. If he didn't mean anything, you wouldn't have been holding his hand in public. You wouldn't have taken him to our restaurant. You wouldn't have been planning weekend getaways with him." She was quiet for a long time, staring into her wine glass. When she finally looked up, her face was different, harder. "You're right," she said. "Jake does mean something to me. He makes me feel alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible. And I don't." "You used to." Her voice was barely audible. "But somewhere along the way, we stopped trying, both of us." I wanted to argue with her, to point out all the ways I'd tried to keep our marriage alive over the years. The surprise dinners, the weekend trips, the little gifts and gestures that she'd barely acknowledged. But what was the point? "So what now?" I asked. "I don't know. I need time to think." "Time to choose, you mean?" She nodded. I stood up, leaving my bourbon untouched. "Take all the time you need, Marta, but while you're thinking, remember this. I know about the money you've been spending on him. I know about the lies you've been telling our kids. And I know about Victoria's role in all of this." Her face went white. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm not the clueless husband you thought I was. I'm not going to sit here and wait for you to decide whether I'm worth keeping. You made your choice when you started screwing Jake Morrison." I headed toward the stairs, then turned back. "Oh, and Marta, I moved some money around today. You might want to check your accounts." I was halfway up the stairs when I heard her gasp. The next few days passed in a strange, tense calm. Marta and I barely spoke, moving around each other like polite strangers. She slept in our bedroom. I stayed in the guest room. She left early for work. I came home late from the gym, but I wasn't idle. I hired a private investigator named Carol Hendricks, a former cop who specialized in marital cases. Carol was in her 50s, gray-haired and no nonsense. with the kind of face that people forgot 5 minutes after meeting her. I don't need proof of the affair, I told her over coffee at a diner downtown. I need leverage. What kind of leverage? The kind that makes sure I come out of this divorce with everything I'm entitled to, and then some. Carol nodded. I can work with that. Give me 2 weeks. While Carol did her thing, I focused on mine. I started going to Marta's favorite restaurants, her yoga studio, the coffee shop near her office. Not to confront her, just to be seen, to remind her and everyone in her social circle that I existed, that I wasn't going away quietly. I also started talking to people, casual conversations with mutual friends, neighbors, people from our church. Nothing dramatic, nothing accusatory, just a concerned husband worried about his wife's recent behavior. She's been so stressed lately, I'd say, with just the right amount of worry in my voice. Working late, traveling for business. I'm worried she's taking on too much. Word travels fast in suburbia, especially when it's wrapped in concern rather than accusation. Within a week, 3 different people had asked Marta if everything was okay at home. But my masterpiece was still to come. Victoria Chen had been avoiding me since the scene at Murphy's, but I knew her routine. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she had lunch at Café Luna, an upscale bistro in Beechwood. She always sat at the same table, always ordered the same salad, always spent exactly 45 minutes there. On Thursday, I was waiting. David! She looked genuinely startled to see me. What are you doing here? Having lunch. Mind if I join you? She glanced around the restaurant like she was looking for an escape route. I'm actually expecting someone. No, you're not. I sat down across from her. You always eat alone on Thursdays. It's your me time, remember? You mentioned it at our Christmas party last year. Victoria's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the fear in her eyes. What do you want? I want to understand why my wife's best friend helped her destroy our marriage. I didn't... Victoria! My voice was quiet, but something in my tone made her stop talking. I know you introduced them. I know you've been covering for her, providing alibis, probably giving her advice on how to handle the situation. What I don't know is why. She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming nervously on the table. Marta was miserable, she finally said. She has been for years. You never paid attention to her, never made her feel special. Jake makes her happy. So, you decided to fix her marriage by helping her cheat. I decided to help my friend find some happiness. I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. Victoria had always been beautiful in that high-maintenance way that required constant effort and significant money. But up close, without the soft lighting of dinner parties and social events, I could see the cracks in the facade, the lines around her eyes that no amount of Botox could completely erase, the tightness around her mouth that spoke of years of carefully controlled resentment. How's your own marriage, Victoria? The question caught her off guard. Excuse me? Richard works a lot of hours, doesn't he? Surgeon's schedule, very demanding. Leaves you with a lot of time to fill, a lot of lunches like this one. My marriage is fine. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're living vicariously through Marta's affair, getting your thrills by helping her sneak around, feeling like you're part of some grand romance. Victoria's face flushed red. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo Carol had taken 2 days earlier. Victoria and a man who definitely wasn't her husband, sharing what looked like an intimate lunch at a restaurant across town. Who's this, Victoria? You're Jake? She stared at the photo, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Here's what's going to happen, I said, putting my phone away. You're going to stop enabling my wife's affair. You're going to stop providing alibis and advice and whatever other services you've been offering. And if I find out you've been talking to her about this conversation or coaching her on how to handle the divorce, I'll make sure Richard sees some very interesting photos. I stood up, dropping a 20 on the table to cover her untouched salad. Enjoy your lunch, Victoria, and your marriage while you still have it. I left her sitting there, staring after me with an expression of pure shock. That night, Marta came home earlier than usual, her face tight with anger. What did you say to Victoria? We had lunch. Nice place. Good service. You should try it sometime. She's upset, David. Really upset. Maybe she should be more careful about who she has lunch with. Marta stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to figure out how much I knew, how much damage I could do. "This isn't you," she said finally. "This vindictive, calculating person. This isn't the man I married." "You're right," I agreed. "The man you married would have begged you to come back. He would have blamed himself for your affair, would have tried to win you back with flowers and promises to change." I stepped closer, and she took an involuntary step backward. "But that man was weak, Marta. He let people walk all over him. He believed that being nice was the same thing as being good." I smiled, and something in my expression made her eyes widen. "You killed that man when you decided to screw Jake Morrison. What you're dealing with now is what grew in his place." She turned and ran upstairs, her heels clicking on the hardwood. A few minutes later, I heard her on the phone, her voice muffled but urgent. I poured myself a bourbon and sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop. Carol had sent me her preliminary report, and it was even better than I'd hoped. Jake Morrison wasn't just a creative director, he was a serial cheater who'd been through 3 relationships in the past 2 years, all of them with married women. He had gambling debts, a cocaine habit, and a history of getting fired from jobs when his personal life interfered with his work. Marta had traded 23 years of marriage for a man who was going to break her heart and probably steal her money in the process. But I wasn't going to let it get that far. I opened a new browser window and started typing. By morning, Jake Morrison was going to discover that some secrets were harder to keep than others, and Marta was going to learn that the nice guy she'd taken for granted was capable of things she'd never imagined. The war was just beginning. Carol's full report arrived on a Monday morning that felt like Christmas and Judgment Day rolled into one. I sat in my office, door locked, reading through 50 pages of photographs, financial records, and documented evidence that painted Jake Morrison as exactly the kind of man I'd suspected he was. The gambling debts were worse than I'd thought, nearly $30,000 to various bookies and online sites. The cocaine habit was documented with photos of him making purchases from a dealer in the flats. But the real gold mine was his employment history. Jake had been fired from his previous job for sexual maltreatment. Not the kind that made headlines, but the kind that got quietly settled with NDAs and severance packages. He had a pattern: target married women in positions of influence, seduce them, use the relationships to advance his career, then move on when things got complicated. Marta was just his latest mark. But the most interesting part of Carol's report wasn't about Jake at all. It was about Victoria. My wife's best friend wasn't just enabling the affair, she was orchestrating it. Carol had tracked her movements, her phone calls, her credit card statements. Victoria had been planning this for months, maybe longer. She'd arranged the introduction, suggested the restaurants, even booked the hotel rooms. And she was documenting everything: photos, text messages, voice recordings. Victoria had been collecting evidence of Marta's affair like she was building a case file. The question was, what did she plan to do with it? I found out that afternoon when she called me. "We need to talk," Victoria said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "I'm listening." "Not over the phone. Meet me at the Starbucks on Cedar Road in an hour." She was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with her back to the wall like she expected an ambush. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "You've been investigating me," she said without preamble. "I've been investigating everyone." I sat down across from her. It's amazing what you can learn about people when you start paying attention. "What do you want?" "The truth. Why did you set up my wife's affair?" Victoria stared into her coffee cup for a long moment. When she looked up, her carefully constructed mask had finally slipped. "Because I hate you," she said simply. "I've hated you for 20 years. The honesty was so unexpected that it took me a moment to respond. "Why?" "Because you never deserved her. Because you're ordinary and boring, and you made her ordinary and boring too. Marta could have been anything, could have had any life she wanted, and she chose you." "So you decided to fix that by hooking her up with a con artist?" Victoria's laugh was bitter. "Jake isn't a con artist. He's just ambitious. He's a hunter, Victoria. He targets married women, uses them, and throws them away. You've handed my wife to a man who's going to destroy her. At least he makes her feel alive." I pulled out my phone and showed her one of Carol's photos, Jake with another woman, taken just 3 days ago. They were kissing in the parking lot of an expensive restaurant. Victoria's face went white. "That's not... When was this taken?" "Thursday night, while Marta was at her book club." I put the phone away. "He's already cheating on her, Victoria. Your grand romantic gesture lasted about 6 weeks." She was quiet for a long time, her hands shaking as she reached for her coffee. "There's something else," she said finally. "Something you need to know." "I'm listening." "I've been recording everything. Phone calls, text messages, conversations. I have evidence of the entire affair." "Why?" Victoria's smile was ugly. "Insurance. In case things went wrong, in case Marta tried to blame me for what happened. I wanted proof that she made her own choices." "And now?" "Now I'm scared. You're not the man I thought you were, David. You're dangerous." I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. Victoria Chen had spent 20 years looking down on me, treating me like furniture in my own home. And now she was afraid of me. The realization was intoxicating. "What do you want, Victoria?" "I want out. I want to give you the recordings and walk away from this mess. In exchange for what?" "Your silence about my extracurricular activities." I pretended to consider the offer. "Show me what you have." Victoria pulled out a tablet and opened an audio file. Marta's voice filled the small space between us, intimate and breathless. "I love the way you touch me. David hasn't made me feel like this in years." I listened to 30 seconds of my wife describing her sexual relationship with Jake Morrison in explicit detail, then held up my hand. "Enough." "There are hours of recordings like that," Victoria said. "Text messages, photos, hotel receipts, everything you'd need for a divorce." "I don't need your evidence, Victoria. I have my own." "Then what do you need?" I leaned forward, my voice dropping to just above a whisper. "I need you to understand that this isn't over. You spent 20 years treating me like I was invisible, like I didn't matter. You convinced my wife that she deserved better than her boring husband. You handed her to a man who's going to break her heart and probably steal her money." Victoria was pressing herself back against the booth, her eyes wide. "But here's the thing about invisible people, Victoria. We see everything, we hear everything, and we remember everything." I stood up. "Send me the recordings, all of them, and then stay away from my family." I left her there, shaking and small, and drove home feeling better than I had in months. That evening, Marta came home with flowers, expensive ones from the florist downtown, and a bottle of wine. "I thought we could have dinner together," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Just the two of us. Like we used to." I looked at the flowers, at the wine, at my wife's carefully hopeful expression, and felt nothing but cold amusement. "Special occasion?" "I've been thinking about what you said, about us, about our marriage. Maybe we could try counseling." "Counseling?" I repeated the word like it was foreign. "What brought this on?" "I miss you, David. I miss us." I wanted to ask her if she'd missed us while she was screwing Jake Morrison. I wanted to ask if she'd thought about counseling while she was planning weekend getaways with her lover. Instead, I smiled. "That sounds nice. Why don't you open the wine while I change clothes?" I went upstairs and checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Jake Morrison, 2 text messages from Victoria, and an email from Carol with the subject line, "You need to see this." Carol's email contained a single photograph. Jake Morrison and a blonde woman I didn't recognize loading suitcases into his BMW. The timestamp showed it had been taken 2 hours ago. Jake was running. I went back downstairs where Marta had set the table with our good china and was arranging the flowers in a vase. "You look beautiful," I said, and meant it. Even after everything, even knowing what I knew, she was still the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. She smiled, and for a moment she looked like the woman I'd married 23 years ago. "Thank you." We ate dinner and made small talk about work, about the kids, about everything except the elephant in the room. Marta was trying so hard to be normal, to recapture something that had been lost, that I almost felt sorry for her. "David," she said as we were clearing the dishes, "there's something I need to tell you." "I'm listening." "Jake and it's over. I ended it this afternoon." I continued loading the dishwasher, my back to her. "What changed your mind?" "You were right about him. He's not the man I thought he was." "What did he do?" She was quiet for so long that I turned around. Tears were streaming down her face. "He asked me for money, said he was in some kind of trouble, needed $20,000 to handle a situation. When I said no, he got angry. Said I owed him after everything he'd done for me." I handed her a tissue. "And that's when you realized what kind of man he was." She nodded. "I feel so stupid, David. So ashamed." "You should." The words came out harsher than I'd intended, and she flinched like I'd slapped her. "I know I hurt you," she said. I know I probably destroyed any chance we had of fixing this, but I want to try. If you'll let me. I looked at my wife, really looked at her. The tears, the regret, the desperate hope in her eyes. 6 months ago, this moment would have been everything I wanted. Marta, apologetic and repentant, asking for forgiveness, wanting to rebuild our marriage. Now it just felt like too little, too late. It's not that simple, Marta. I know, but we could start somewhere, counseling, like I said. Or maybe we could take a trip, just the two of us. Remember how we used to talk about going to Ireland? I remember a lot of things. I closed the dishwasher and turned to face her. I remember our anniversary dinner that you missed because you were with Jake. I remember the lies, the sneaking around, the way you looked at me like I was something you'd scraped off your shoe. David, please. I remember finding out that my wife's best friend had been planning your affair for months, that she'd been recording your conversations, like she was directing a movie. Marta's face went white. What are you talking about? I pulled out my phone and played 30 seconds of one of Victoria's recordings. Marta's voice filled the kitchen, breathless and intimate. I wish I could leave, David, and just be with you all the time. Marta sank into a chair, her face buried in her hands. Oh, God. Victoria recorded us? Hours of recordings, Marta. Text messages, photos, hotel receipts. Your entire affair, documented like evidence in a criminal case. Why would she do that? Because she hates me. Because she wanted to make sure you couldn't back out, couldn't change your mind and try to save our marriage. She was protecting her investment. Marta looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. What are you going to do? I sat down across from her, my hands flat on the table. That depends on you. What do you mean? I mean, you have a choice to make, Marta. You can sign divorce papers and walk away with whatever the court decides you deserve. Or you can fight me, and I'll make sure everyone, our kids, your coworkers, your family, knows exactly what kind of woman you are. You're threatening me. I'm giving you options, more than you gave me when you decided to destroy our marriage. She was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. When she finally looked up, something had changed in her face. The desperation was gone, replaced by something harder. You want a divorce? Fine. But I'm not going to let you destroy me out of spite. I'm not doing this out of spite, Marta. I'm doing it out of justice. Justice? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to punish me for being unhappy? For finding someone who made me feel alive again? I want to punish you for lying to me for months, for humiliating me in front of our friends, for planning to leave me while pretending everything was fine. I stood up, looking down at her. But mostly, I want to punish you for thinking I was too weak to fight back. I left her sitting there and went upstairs to pack a bag. I was done living in the same house as my cheating wife, done pretending we could fix something that had been broken beyond repair. But I wasn't done with Marta, or Jake Morrison, or Victoria Chen. The real war was just beginning. I moved into a furnished apartment across town and spent the next week putting the final pieces of my plan into place. Tom Kowalski filed the divorce papers on a Friday afternoon, and by Monday morning, half of Cleveland knew that David and Marta Brennan were splitting up. The reaction was exactly what I'd expected. Marta's friends rallied around her, painting me as the bitter husband who couldn't handle his wife's success. My friends, what few I had left, offered awkward condolences and changed the subject as quickly as possible. But I wasn't interested in winning the court of public opinion. I was interested in winning everything else. Carol's final report had given me everything I needed to destroy Jake Morrison's life, and I'd spent the weekend implementing a plan that would have made Machiavelli proud. Anonymous tips to his employer about his cocaine habit, his gambling debts, his history of sexual maltreatment. Photos and documentation sent to the Ohio State Board of Professional Ethics. A carefully crafted letter to his landlord about suspicious activities in his apartment. By Wednesday, Jake had been fired from Pinnacle Marketing. By Thursday, he was under investigation by 3 different regulatory bodies. By Friday, he'd been evicted from his luxury condo and was living in a motel on the outskirts of town. But Jake Morrison was just the appetizer. The main course was still to come. Marta had hired Patricia Vance, one of Cleveland's most expensive divorce attorneys, which told me she was planning to fight dirty. Patricia was known for her scorched earth tactics, her ability to turn divorce proceedings into public spectacles that destroyed both parties in the name of winning, which was exactly what I'd been hoping for. Tom and I met with Patricia and Marta in a conference room that probably cost more per hour than most people made in a day. Patricia was everything I'd expected. Sharp suit, sharper smile, the kind of huntery confidence that came from years of feeding on other people's misery. "Mr. Brennan," she said, not bothering to stand when I entered the room. "I've heard so much about you. All good, I hope?" Her smile was razor thin. "That depends on your perspective." Marta looked terrible. She'd lost weight, and there were dark circles under her eyes that no amount of makeup could hide. She wouldn't meet my gaze, just stared at the legal documents spread across the conference table like they were written in a foreign language. "Let's get down to business," Patricia said, opening a thick folder. "My client is prepared to be reasonable, Mr. Brennan, but she won't be taken advantage of." "Define reasonable." 50-50 split of all assets, including your business. Spousal support for 5 years while she transitions to single life. She keeps the house, you keep your retirement accounts. I looked at Tom, who was trying not to smile. We'd expected something like this. "Counter offer," I said. "She gets 30% of marital assets, no spousal support, and I keep the business. She can have the house if she can afford the mortgage payments on her own." Patricia's laugh was like broken glass. "That's insulting, Mr. Brennan. My client contributed to your success for 23 years. She's entitled to half of everything you've built together. Your client spent the last 6 months of our marriage screwing another man and planning to leave me for him. I'd say that voids any claims to partnership." Marta flinched, but Patricia just smiled wider. "Infidelity isn't grounds for financial penalty in Ohio, as I'm sure your attorney has explained. My client's personal choices don't affect her legal rights." "Maybe not," I agreed. "But they might affect her professional reputation." I pulled out a tablet and opened one of Victoria's recordings. Marta's voice filled the conference room. "I've been using the company credit card for hotel rooms. David never checks the statements, and my boss thinks I'm traveling for client meetings." Patricia's smile faltered. "Turn that off." "There's more," I said, pausing the recording. "Hours of your client discussing her affair, her plans to leave me, her use of company resources for personal activities. And I'm sure her employer would find it fascinating." "You can't use illegally obtained recordings in divorce proceedings," Patricia said, but her voice had lost its confidence. "I'm not planning to use them in court," I said. "I'm planning to use them everywhere else." Tom cleared his throat. "My client is prepared to keep this matter private, provided we can reach a reasonable settlement." "This is extortion," Patricia said. "This is negotiation," I corrected. "Your client wanted to play hardball. Now she gets to see what that looks like." Marta finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want, David?" "I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I want you to realize that the nice guy you took for granted was a choice I made, not a weakness you could exploit." I stood up, straightening my tie. "You have 48 hours to accept my offer. After that, I start sharing Victoria's recordings with anyone who'll listen." "You fool," Marta said, finally meeting my eyes. "You absolute fool." "Yes," I agreed. "I am. Funny how that works out." Tom and I left them there, Patricia frantically scribbling notes while Marta stared at the table like she was trying to burn holes in it with her eyes. "Think they'll take the deal?" Tom asked as we waited for the elevator. "They'll take it. Patricia's smart enough to know when she's beaten, and Marta's too scared of public humiliation to fight." I was right. 36 hours later, Tom called to tell me that Marta had accepted my terms. The divorce would be finalized within 60 days, and I'd walk away with most of my assets intact. But I wasn't done yet. Saturday afternoon, I drove to the suburban community center where the Westside Business Association was holding their monthly networking event. It was the kind of gathering Marta had dragged me to for years. Small business owners, marketing executives, local politicians, all pretending to care about each other's success while looking for ways to advance their own interests. I hadn't been to one of these events in over a year, but I was still technically a member, and I had something to say. The crowd was exactly what I'd expected. 200 people in business casual attire, clutching wine glasses and making small talk about market conditions and tax policy. I recognized most of the faces, clients, competitors, people who'd smiled at me and Marta at dozens of similar events over the years. Victoria was there, of course, holding court near the registration table with her usual circle of admirers. She saw me the moment I walked in, and I watched the color drain from her face. The event's organizer, a cheerful woman named Susan Walsh, spotted me near the bar and hurried over with a surprised smile. David, what a pleasant surprise. We haven't seen you in ages. I've been busy with the divorce, I said loudly enough for nearby conversations to pause, but I wanted to make sure I said goodbye to everyone before I moved on to the next chapter of my life. Susan's smile faltered. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear about you and Marta. Don't be. It's been very educational. More conversations were stopping now, people turning to listen with the barely concealed excitement that comes from witnessing someone else's drama. In fact, I continued, I learned so much about people over the past few months that I thought I should share some of that knowledge with my friends and colleagues. Susan was backing away now, sensing disaster but unable to stop it. I walked to the center of the room where a small stage was set up for the evening's speaker. Excuse me, I said, tapping the microphone. Could I have everyone's attention for just a moment? The room went quiet, 200 faces turning toward me with expressions ranging from curiosity to horror. Victoria was pushing through the crowd, probably trying to reach the exit, but she wasn't going to make it in time. For those of you who don't know me, I'm David Brennan. My wife Marta and I have been part of this community for over a decade, and I wanted to take a moment to thank some people before we go our separate ways. I pulled out my phone and opened the audio app where I'd saved excerpts from Victoria's recordings. First, I want to thank my wife's best friend, Victoria Chen, for her unwavering support during our marriage. Victoria, could you raise your hand so everyone can see you? Victoria had frozen near the back of the room, her face white with terror. Victoria went above and beyond the call of friendship, I continued. She introduced my wife to her lover, helped plan their secret meetings, and even recorded their conversations for posterity. That's the kind of dedication you don't see very often. The crowd was murmuring now, heads turning to stare at Victoria, who looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. I also want to thank Jake Morrison, though he's not here tonight. Jake's probably busy packing for another quick departure from town. That's his specialty, seducing married women, using them for money and career advancement, then moving on when things get complicated. I pressed play on my phone, and Marta's voice filled the room. Jake says he loves me, but he needs $20,000 to handle some gambling debts. I'm thinking about taking it from our savings account without telling David. The room erupted. People were talking over each other, some moving closer to hear better, others backing toward the exits. Victoria had given up trying to leave and was standing frozen like a deer in headlights. And finally, I said, raising my voice over the chaos, I want to thank my wife Marta for teaching me that being a nice guy is often just another word for being a fool. She showed me that some people mistake kindness for weakness, loyalty for stupidity. I turned off the recording and looked directly at Victoria. But here's what I learned. When nice guys stop being nice, they don't become mean. They become dangerous. I stepped down from the stage and walked through the crowd, people parting in front of me like I was carrying a loaded weapon. Victoria was still standing near the back wall, tears streaming down her face. Goodbye, Victoria, I said as I passed her. Give my regards to Richard. I walked out of that community center and never looked back. The story spread through Cleveland's business community like wildfire. By Monday morning, Victoria Chen had resigned from 3 different boards and canceled her membership at the country club. By Wednesday, Marta had taken a leave of absence from her job and was reportedly staying with her sister in Columbus. Jake Morrison had simply vanished, leaving behind unpaid debts and a trail of angry creditors. I spent the next month finalizing the divorce and closing up the loose ends of my old life. The house sold quickly. Apparently, scandal makes for good gossip, but bad property values in our neighborhood. I used the proceeds to pay off the mortgage and buy a smaller place across town, closer to Sam's gym. Ross and Amelia took the divorce about as well as could be expected. Ross blamed me for being too harsh. Amelia blamed Marta for cheating. Both of them blamed Victoria for orchestrating the whole mess. We'd probably all be in therapy for years, but at least we were honest about it now. Tom Kowalski called on a Friday afternoon to tell me that the divorce was final. How does it feel? He asked. I was sitting in my new kitchen, looking out at a small backyard that needed work, thinking about the future for the first time in months. It feels like justice, I said. And now? Now I figure out what comes next. I hung up the phone and poured myself a bourbon, the good stuff, not the cheap whiskey I'd been drinking during the worst of it. Then I raised the glass in a toast to my empty house, my empty marriage, and my empty bank account. To new beginnings, I said aloud, and to the fools who made them necessary. I drank the bourbon in one swallow and started planning the rest of my life. 6 months later, I ran into Marta at the grocery store. She looked good, rested, healthy, like she'd been taking care of herself. She was with a man I didn't recognize, someone closer to her age with kind eyes and an easy smile. "David," she said, stopping her cart near the produce section. "How are you?" "Good. You look well." "Thank you. This is Robert." She gestured to the man beside her. "Robert, this is my ex-husband, David." Robert shook my hand with a firm grip and a genuine smile. "Nice to meet you, David. Marta's told me a lot about you." "All bad, I hope." He laughed. "Actually, mostly good. She says you taught her some important lessons about honesty." I looked at Marta, who was blushing slightly. "Is that right?" "You were right about Jake," she said quietly. "About everything, really. I was selfish and stupid and cruel. I'm sorry, David. I know it doesn't change anything, but I am sorry." Apology accepted. We talked for a few more minutes about the kids, about work, about the weather. Normal conversation between two people who used to be married and had learned to be civil. When they left, Robert shook my hand again and told me it was good to meet me. I finished my shopping and drove home to my small house with its small yard and its small mortgage. It wasn't the life I'd planned 25 years ago, but it was honest. It was mine. And sometimes that was enough. I never saw Victoria Chen again, though I heard she moved to Florida after her own divorce became final. Apparently, Richard hadn't been as forgiving as I'd been. Jake Morrison resurfaced in Phoenix 6 months later, running the same con on a different set of sufferers. Some people never learn, but I had learned. I'd learned that being nice was a choice, not a character flaw. I'd learned that trust had to be earned, not assumed. And I'd learned that when someone shows you who they really are, you should believe them the first time. Most importantly, I'd learned that sometimes the only way to win is to be willing to lose everything. I kept going to Sam's gym, kept working on my business, kept building a life that was smaller but more honest than the one I'd lost. And every morning when I woke up in my small house, I remembered that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The nice guy was dead. What had grown in his place was something harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous, and I was perfectly fine with that.